Yo, what's up guys? So today I'm going to be going over YCS Dortmund and a recap of this event. I know this was a one YCS event, and what I mean by that is this is the only event in which it's a new ban list, but there's no A golf cards legal. So this is a one YCS format in that essence, but I still figured it's a really good YCS to study from, to learn from, and to look at as well as recap, right? So but before we do, don't forget to check out my sponsor, YCS1.com. You can use pack 10 for 10% off all the Supreme Pro sleeves, as well as sleeve sheaths. You can go to sleevesheath.de, and you can use pack 5 for 5% off the entire website. But let's jump into the video now, and let's look at the deck breakdown. There was 2,455 duelists that came across from all over the world to YCS Dortmund. European YCS are typically known to host a bunch of players from across the world, and European YCS are typically 12 rounds in nature due to how big they are, and that usually means that there's a cut to top 64. But let's look at day one breakdown, right? The people who came to the event and what percentage of what deck did they end up choosing to play, like what was their deck choice. And obviously in my other videos, as a competitive player, I always explain to you all that deck choice is very important for an event, right? Choosing the right deck, deciding to pick this over any other option that you could have played, right? There's a bunch of decks right now, multitude of decks that are legal for YCS Dortmund, especially with the Rise Heart being banned. You can actually play literally any deck finally, right? But the question is, what deck do you end up taking? So let's take a look at the deck breakdown, right? We see Unchained Soul all the way at the top ranks with 11% of duelists deciding to pick it up. 11%, it's roughly around 260 players, and then it's followed by Purrely, 10% as well. Tearlaments coming up in third, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Fluonery, 7%, it just won the last YCS. Labyrinth, Branded, and then 52% other. And I think that 52% is an indicator of all the decks that were gatekept by a Rise Art being legal. Infernoble, Vanadium, Adventure Synchron, right? Like these type of decks that were not able to get the representation at a YCS, in Top Cut at least, finally are because of a Rise Art getting cooked pretty much. Now, I think there's a couple interesting choices in the deck breakdown, and I'll actually explain what deck I would have chosen if I actually went to this YCS. So first off, I actually would have played Purrely, and I think the reason why is because I think it's the most well-positioned deck in the metagame, due to the fact that you can't really play Book of Moon anymore. It's just not that good of a card when you consider all these decks that are available. People play cards like Bestials, it doesn't really do anything to Purrely. They have to play Nib for the Unchained deck. All these cards that people are playing aren't really that effective into the Purrely strategy. And so I thought that this deck would perform really well, and combined with really good technical play, can actually end up winning the event, right? I think Joshua Schmidt ended up playing it. I know like a bunch of other players decided playing, like Hani as well. And I actually think that, Purrely was a really good choice. But it actually didn't convert that well when we go into look at the top cut breakdown. The other deck that a lot of high-level players took were Tearlaments. Like, why do people take Tearlaments? I think the reason why a lot of people took Tearlaments was because of the fact that a Rise Art being banned brought a lot of nostalgia from a lot of people, okay? And what I mean by this is, I'll take for example Vins, who won YCS Dortmund in 2022. Actually spoke to me and said, I decided to play Tearlaments for 2023 Dortmund because I won 22 Dortmund with it, and for me the deck is a deck of passion, right? Like the deck choice is almost one out of passion. Like I want to play this deck again, to maybe run it back, win the YCS back to back in the same city with the same deck, right? For others, it's they want to relive the Tearlament format, right? The tier 0 format. Be able to play Tearlaments again. And so I actually think that the reason why this deck was so highly represented wasn't necessarily because maybe it was the best choice, but mainly because of the fact that it was a nostalgia factor. It was a fan favorite in a lot of people's minds, and I think that's like plays a big factor into like why decks get highly represented, right? So even if it's not the best strategy, it will, I think, get a lot of people to play the deck. Like a lot of people that I spoke to, like a lot of high level players, literally was like, yeah, like I just want to gamble one last time. I just want to run the casino, you know. Because I think the issue with a deck like Tearlaments is that a lot of the cards that hit Unchained also hit Tearlament, and so for me, it makes it not necessarily the best pick because a lot of people, you're catching like the strays, right? Like, you know, like people are aiming their all of their resources at like the Unchained deck because, you know, it's a very popular deck. It did really well the past few YCSs, and the Tearlament deck doesn't necessarily like it's catching all the strays that they hate, right? Like the Druid Worms, you have the Dwellers, you have the Inscriptions, you have like all these like crazy cards that people are choosing to play now, because you know, of the Tearlament being a strategy. Now, what does this mean for the future, right? Like, because now what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a look at the top cut, the conversion. If you paid attention to the prior graph before to the graph now, you saw that the most represented deck was Unchained, but it was only 14% of top 64, right? And Tearlament, which was the third most played deck, had a really good conversion rate at 16% of top 64. And then you have decks like Dragon Link. Well, to no one's surprise, with that many Tearlament players in the room, all the Dragon players are probably going to do pretty well, right? So, it makes a lot of sense. And from what I was told, a lot of people played against Tearlaments on the bubble, day 2. Played a bunch of Tearlaments. Like, one of my friends played 5 Tearlaments in Swiss. Do you understand, like, how crazy it is to play 5 Tearlaments in Swiss? Like, you know, it reminds me almost of, like, YCS Pasadena when, like, everyone just played tier, right? You got Branded 8%, Flandre's 8%, some of the combo decks have been named at 5%, you have 36%, just every other deck, right? Purrely is not even on this top 64 charts. So let's talk about a couple things. Why did Tearlaments do so well? I think that there's a couple factors that goes into it. I think because Tearlaments was actually highly represented, some of them were bound to get into the top cut just by virtue of like getting super lucky, in my opinion. Like we've seen feature matches where the tier player literally hits a Yugioh, Kelbeck, Mandora. You know, what else is there? Like pretty much like all 4 one-ofs. Like they mill all 4 of them. Of course, like, you know, if you mill like that, like the deck is going to perform really well. And over the course of the 12 rounds, if you successfully are able or lucky enough to do, you know, mill that well, then you're going to do really good. But I also think that a lot of the top players were on this deck, as a result pushing the narrative of the deck into top cut like a lot higher, right? So we have like Gabriel Nets, we have like Herman Hansen, like the known players that, like, I think if they played any other deck, I think they would have done really well regardless, in my opinion. And like Herman literally tops with like Madolce in tier 0 format. You know what I'm saying? Like that just goes to show that, like, I think the numbers are a little bit higher because, you know, of these like factors. And Tearlament is not the worst strategy. Like, I don't think it's necessarily the worst deck in the room by any means. And then that goes into like why Unchained still did really well. Like, even though a lot of people target that deck, it can still do really well. Because like Unchained is a very resilient strategy to a lot of the cards that people are playing. Obviously, like in top 4, the Unchained player Brick. Jesse, I think, made top 16 with Unchained, and he literally got Gimmick Puppet Lock. Like, if you notice, like all the YCs that Jesse's are losing, he's getting floodgated out. That's just by nature of the format. You have Dragon Link at 13%. I mean, to no one's surprise, the deck has been performing really well. Like Ryan, you went undefeated in Swiss with this deck at Vancouver. You know, it won YCS Sao Paulo. Like Dragon Link has been a deck that has gotten really popular because of the fact that even though it got hit by the ban list per se, the fact that it plays a lot of Bestials is like really good for the Tearlament deck, for the Unchained deck, for the branded deck. And if you guys watch my preparation for a YCS video, I even explained how I think maining Bestials is actually good this format. There's some bad matchups where it might not do anything, but overall the card is just actually really, really good into the majority, into the field of the room, right? So now let's talk about the elephant in the room. Why did Purrely not convert well? I think the reason why Purrely didn't convert well was due to a multitude of factors. I think the deck is genuinely very, very hard to play correctly. It's a very high, intense deck in which you have to make very optimal decision making across 12 rounds. Very, very difficult deck to do. Very difficult feat to do. Not only that, I think some of the cards that people were teching, like barriers, were still in people's deck, which can be an issue for the Purrely deck. And not only that, I think people were not fast enough to adapt and still kept in Book of Moons, Book of Eclipse in their deck. I think that's like, you know, sometimes you try to make the meta call, but people aren't fast enough to adjust to that meta call, so it might not be the best choice as a result of that. And those are things that you have to consider, right? Like, theoretically, people shouldn't have Book of Moons in their deck, but you play against the guy who literally still has 6 books in his main. Like, what are you supposed to do, right? So I think that's like one of the other reasons that the deck can be very fragile to a couple of like non-engine if people decide to play it. And I think the deck is really, really good when people aren't prepped for it. But it seems like people play side XYZ Encore, like you saw Gabriel Ness in his deck probably played XYZ Encore. I saw a bunch of other people played XYZ Encore in their side deck, which obviously is gonna like, that card just destroys that deck. So very, very scary. And a lot of good players, a lot of deck players that I watch actually really, really respected that deck. And as a result, the deck just got murdered. But it is a scary deck, right? That's why people are prepared for it. But it seems like there's actually more hate towards Purrely right now than you would think, because it's a very easy deck to like put hate in for, whereas Unchained, it's not as easy. And then you have like the top 64 breakdown being like the Fluanderie strategy. Obviously that deck's gonna do well. Like, you know, a couple players who get lucky enough to not break will make it into the top cut. The Canadian people, the people who win all the dice rolls, will literally make it into the top cut, right? Because that deck struggles a lot at going second. But if you win the dice roll, you pretty much get to guarantee go first game 3, right? So, and then 36% others. We see the country breakdown. I think it's interesting for a lot of people to know. A German actually won. A German YCS. 58% of the YCS attendees were actually from Germany, which is really cool. It makes sense. You're in the heart of Germany, so you're gonna have a lot more duelists coming from that area. You have people from France, Italy, the UK, Netherlands, Switzerland, and 12% other, right? So, pretty cool. 2,400 duelists, pretty neat. Now let's look at the YCS winners deck list. We have right here. We have pretty much right here the goo. Okay, 46 cards Rikka. I did not know the Rikka deck is this thick, but hey, we'll take a look. Okay, so the deck plays pretty standard on engine, I would say. I think because he added 3 small world to the deck, which I don't know if it's necessarily common. I've seen people play, not really play it. Made it so that the deck is, even though it's at 46 cards, the 3 extra small worlds make it like the same. Like, it doesn't really affect the consistency that much, even though he did break in game 3 of the finals and it still pulled off a win. Played really, really well from all the feature matches I've seen. So huge congratulations to Julius S. For winning the event with Rikka. I think the meme is that like Rikka just keeps winning in Europe because people just refuse to read these cards, while it literally has won Euros 2022 and Euros 2023. So, hey man, hopefully some people end up reading these cards. I literally spent so much time, energy, and effort reading and understanding this deck and actually playing this deck because of the fact that like it's just one of those strategies that is quite punishing if you are not familiar with what the deck aims to do. Okay, so I think that's a really, really important distinction to understand about the deck. In terms of a meta call, was this deck the best choice to play? I'm not really sure, to be honest. Like, I think maybe like with all the people maining Bestials, it could be a good idea. My theory on this YCS was that I think that people were actually going to switch to hand traps because of the majority and the vast decks that were in the room. As a result, I think the Rikka deck is actually worse in the hand traps than, let's say, how do I explain it? Like, I think the Rikka deck is really good when people play board breakers. Like, I feel like the deck is very resilient into board breakers. But into hand traps, it's a lot more vulnerable in my opinion. Especially because I thought that people would main deck Joel. Like, if I went to this YCS, I would have main deck Joel 100%. But Joel was nowhere to be found in anyone's decks, which is kind of crazy in my opinion. Because you literally have like so many of these like decks that just do like add 20 cards per turn, like try to FTK you. And yeah, so that was kind of like my intuition with this deck. I just think that like this deck could have been more well positioned. I think this deck was pretty well positioned, to be honest, like after looking at all of it. So I don't really mind this deck choice, to be honest. I think overall, like it was fine. The deck that took everyone by storm was actually the second place list, which is Vanquish Soul, which actually would have been the winner of the YCS if he just kept his composure. But for both these guys right here, this was their first YCS top. So both these guys topped a YCS for the first time ever. Okay, breaking the bubble, the curse finally. And for Luca, he actually, the cool backstory about him is that this is actually the first YCS he's ever attended. So maybe that will motivate you to show up at the YCS, because you never know, this YCS, the next one might just be your time to shine. Pretty standard list, but of course the card that stands at the top is There Can Only Be One. I think that's a insanely absurd card that if you could main would have been the medical. Like, it seems really weird, but one of the things that I looked into when I was prepping or helping people prep for YCS Dortmund was, what deck can you play that can main deck There Can Only Be One? And I think the deck that people looked into were like Tearlaments, Vanquish Soul, Branded Chimera, blah, 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 yeah. And like, that card is just too good. Like, with the vast majority of hand traps that he's playing, that is really, really well positioned in the meta. Like, Crow, I think, was really, really solid into the majority of people's decks. Imperm is really, really good. Ash is really solid. Then you have like 3 Bell. I liked it. I think Crow is also a little bit better because it played around thrust a little bit more efficiently. So I think that's actually pretty nice. And then his side deck was just like a bunch of like board breakers, like 3 more floods. He played OG Book of Moon over Eclipse, which is quite interesting. I'm not sure what the theory on that was. Maybe he doesn't want to lose his board as a result. But yeah, so there's like Eclipse. There's also cards like Herald of the Abyss with thrust targets for the Purrely strategy. I think his deck was actually like really clean in my opinion. I don't really have any other changes except maybe like changing Bell. But overall, the deck's really clean. I liked his ratios. I like the 2 Mad Love. I know like a lot of people play 3, but I think 2 is like a good number because it's not really the most ideal normal summon. The best one's like actually just Raisin. But yeah, the deck looks really clean. Obviously, you're gonna be a little bit more nervous when it's your first YCS top, and so can't really fault him too much for how he played. But overall, huge congratulations to these guys and the entire YCS experience. Rikka has once again taken another YCS by storm, and we're just here. We're living in a plant world, right? So EU is pretty environmentally friendly. So, but anyways, I will be at YCS Indy. I will be at YCS Richmond and YCS Bologna for the remainder of this year. So I hope to see you guys at these YCSs. And I hope you guys enjoy the recap. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. And also follow me on my Twitch. But anyways, I hope you guys have a great day. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.